Shalom. So what does one do when one encounters texts that just don't make sense? As a modern person, I love reading and studying Jewish texts and living Jewishly, but sometimes the texts themselves really challenge, really force me to begin to wonder whether or not a text written such a long time ago can still speak to me, especially if it speaks in mystical terms that as a rationalist, I have a real problem internalizing or trying to figure out where it fits into my view of the world. And there are two such texts in this week's Parashat Hukkat. One of the texts is about what happens when our ancestors, and all their mumbling and grumbling and complaining about life in the wilderness, find that God is punishing them by sending seraphim, a kind of snake, to attack them. And when they become contrite and want to make it up to God, they turn to Moses and say, please help us stop this terrible attack of the snakes. At which point Moses intercedes on their behalf, and God says, all you have to do is erect a seraph, a serpent on a post, a kind of statue or idol, and everybody who looks at that will be healed. That smacks of idolatry and paganism, the kind of the opposite of the anti-pagan polemic which is found throughout the Tanakh. So, how are we supposed to understand that? Our rabbis apparently were also bothered by this, and in the Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, the rabbis come up with a solution. They come up with an explanation. And they insert words into the text that make it acceptable, palatable, if not viable. They claim that the intention of that explanation, that commandment by God, to erect this statue of a serpent and have everyone who was bitten by the snake look at it and be healed, was not because the serpent itself had magical powers, but because it would cause those who had been afflicted to look up towards heaven, and therefore they become reminded of their relationship with God, and once they reconnect with God, at that moment they'll be healed. This is a pretty forced explanation, and I can't accept the explanation that the sages give in the Mishnah as the pshat, the literal original intention of the biblical text. But the fact that the rabbis recognize that it's problematic and wrestle with it and come up with a plausible response, that's powerful to me. And implicit in that is the notion that the rabbis have always looked at the text as the launching point for further discussion and have a readiness to reinterpret and change the message of the original text when necessary. It implies that religions change and grow, and that in different generations they have to offer different messages and different teachings. And that is very attractive to me. On the other hand, the opening verses of this week's parasha discuss the parah adumah, the red heifer, and how the red heifer would be burnt and its ashes mixed with water, and that water would be used to purify those who were impure. That, as we're told in the famous story about the idolater who comes to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, reeks of a paganism that even the pagans recognize as all too familiar. And so the pagan challenges Yochanan ben Zakkai to explain how this ritual appears in the same Torah which forbids the practice of magic and other kinds of pagan forms of worship. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai manages to convince the pagan that in fact all it is the equivalent of, well, what we might call getting rid of a dibuk. Getting some kind of spirit that's taken over someone's body, exorcised from that body. And that's all it is. That's what we do with the ashes of the red heifer when we sprinkle them on someone who's become impure. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's students hear the explanation, and after the idolater leaves, they challenge him, saying, okay, he doesn't know enough about Jewish tradition to know that the answer you gave is not plausible. Tell us the truth. What's the real reason for that particular law? Yochanan ben Zakkai's response is, Chayechem, by your lives. Lo hamet mitameh v'lo hamayim mitarim. Neither the dead can cause impurity, nor the water can purify. But rather, this is a law. Zot Hukkat Torah, as it says in the beginning of our parasha, this is a law of the Torah. It is the kind of law that doesn't have an explanation. It's a Hukkat. God decreed the law, we have to follow it. I find that kind of explanation logical in the sense that while it might seem to be demanding just blind faith, what it really says to me is there are still secrets that we have to unravel. There are still explanations that we have not yet found that will make it easier for us to understand, internalize, and live by the lessons of our Torah. Our job is to continue to study, to plug away at unraveling those secrets and sharing them with each other, with our students, and future generations to come, so that the message of the Torah will always be alive and vibrant and meaningful for each and every one of us. Shabbat Shalom.